session together before dinner to have a question and answer time. And I just want to introduce myself. I'm Pastor Aaron, pastor here at Carlsbad Community Church. Everybody said it before me. Thank you, Patrick. Well, I've got Patrick. Patrick's excited. But we just wanted to just echo what's been said. What a blessing it is to be together. We're so grateful to be able to host this, to have the opportunity to come out together. And I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of the volunteers and all of the help that's gone into this. And especially, I know Pastor James has just done a ton of work on the back end, and I'm so grateful for him. Thank you, James, in the back. He wants to... And I did have, it wouldn't be right, I needed to take a quick moment. By a show of hands, who likes roast beef? Where's Matt? Matt, do you see that? If it was a really small number, I was going to say there's the elect, the remnant. But I also wanted to clarify, in case you came here, you're not from Carlsbad Community Church. We don't usually play fast and loose with the text. I know my associate was talking about the tree of the knowledge of poultry and pork, and that is not what we teach here. But anyways, that's for Matt. So it is my privilege to just open up and spend some time and asking some questions. Thank you for the questions that you gave. If you didn't get a question to me, you can shape it like an airplane and throw it up here. If it makes it to the stage, I'll ask it. Otherwise, sorry, you can save it for later. I've got a host here, and I wanted to start, though, before we get into the questions. We've heard a lot about marriage today, and I don't know about, well, I can speak for the rest of you, I think. It has been just a blessing, Dr. Walls. This is... Amen. I had the privilege of sitting in class with you a couple of years back in PM 712, and I've told people every week I'd come to class, and it was like, how was the Bible going to be opened up in a way that, was just going to be clear and precise and practical, and how can I write down all of the really great, wisdom phrases and mottos. And so thank you for your ministry with us today. But I think it would be good if you started just to give us a little bit more history about, this is marriage, of course. You've talked about your wife, but how did you guys meet? What brought you together? Inquiring minds want to know, right?
Am I on? Yeah, there I am. Thank you. Student at Liberty University, junior. She was a freshman. There's 6,000 students on campus, but somehow you identify some that you'd like to get to know. And I noticed Karen jogging around the loop of the student housing area. And I played 3 sports in high school, college football. I do run, I do compete, but I don't jog. I have no interest in running just to run. But when I saw her jogging, I decided I would be a jogger. This is a true story. So I took up jogging until I caught her, and then I stopped jogging. So I met her as a student at Liberty, and we began dating. We dated a couple of years there, and I went through seminary. We were married, and so that's how I met Karen. Karen's a military daughter. She's a twin, and she and her family have lived all over the country, but spent probably a decade in Virginia Beach at Langley. And so we've known each other 42 years, and it all started by seeing this girl jog, and I became a jogger.
Right. Anybody else have a story like that? Okay, well, that's one of a kind, I think. So, well, we want to get as many questions as we can out to you, and we're going to do as best as we can. I'm just going to lay them out to you one at a time, and do your best. Take the time that you think necessary for each.
And by the way, thank you for this. I got to glance through some of them, and the transparency, the sincerity, it's refreshing.
And just a ground rule, I'm the questioner, so I don't answer.
No answers.
I just question. If you need,
I don't know.
Phone a friend. Patrick's right over there, so we can do that.
Or
So here we go. In regards to the leave and cleave message, how much should you continue to support your adult children financially after they are married? It says, is it wise to help them pay off college or buy a house? Is it wise to continue to include them in your will?
Was that on there? Was it wise
Yeah,
to
no, I
include
didn't.
them in your will?
Yeah, I would never add anything to a question.
So I'm assuming that's really the cleave focus, because cleave is no rivals. Leave, you've left father and mother, so it's not your children that you would be leaving. So it's cleaving, and if we're going to apply cleaving, it's when that priority competes with the priority of your marriage or your family. It's a nuanced question. I think it's a wisdom question. I think it can vary, and I'm not trying to dodge it, but it can vary from child to child. If obviously they need to become independent, freestanding moral agents. They need to be able to function. And in our culture, there's prolonged adolescence, prolonged dependence, and that can be something you do not want to kind of facilitate, this ongoing dependence on you. Having said that, we're also in a culture where things are really expensive. And whether it's college loans, now the president may forgive all the debt in the end, I don't know. But, it's bottom line is sometimes you can strategically help your child establish their own future, and you have the means to do that. And I think that's a worthy consideration to invest in your children. But that would turn for me on the maturity of the child and the wisdom of the timing of that investment. I certainly have benefited by strategic investments from my parents and my grandparents. And I'm grateful for that, and I would certainly not want to suggest that that's inappropriate. However, if that was competing with my priorities in my marriage, investing in the kids, and I'm ignoring some priorities with my wife or our family, then I would have to adjust. So I don't know if that fully gets at it, but that's where I would be.
I think that's good. Here's one. How does a husband practically and lovingly lead in a decision when his wife isn't fully on board?
So the whole principle of one flesh, unity, is working to a solution that is a conclusion that represents a shared conviction, which may mean you need to exercise or leverage allies to help you lead her by informing her of perspectives she may not default to. The assumption I see in that question is, honey, I'm not with you. I don't believe we ought to do that. And two things. One, I would take the time to lead her. There's very few decisions you have to turn on a dime. And it's respectful to include her in the process, which should begin with prayer, should include the Bible. The multitude of counselors, their safety, purposes are established. I'd like to say this, and maybe this will be helpful. You measure decisions by how you make them, because you don't control outcomes. Every good decision doesn't end in a prosperous profit. When Paul was going to Jerusalem, it was a God-honoring decision, but it involved shipwreck and jail. So all God-honoring decisions don't result in fair weather outcomes. And all fair weather outcomes are not God-honoring decisions. You measure decisions by how you make them. That is, you apply the principles that are biblically defined. And as a spouse, I would think you would sit down together and submit yourself to that process. We're going to seek godly counsel. We're going to seek the Word of God and the people of God. We're going to get objective input that seeks to solidify the wisdom of this decision. We're going to ask the Lord for internal passion. It is God who works in us both to will and to do of His good pleasure. If I'm walking with God, He gives me a heart to do the will of God. Let the peace of God rule in your heart like an umpire. That's peace and passion, objective counsel, and has God opened the door? And those are kind of the four flags, signals I look at, and I take my wife with me. And we're both submitted to that process. In the end, and perhaps I'll get at a second part of this, in the end, I'm responsible for the decision. So as the head of the home, it's both the responsibility and the privilege of making that decision. And there ought to be sufficient trust, wife to husband, both my walk with God and the process we pursued, even if she is not fully on board by way of understanding or conviction. She ought to be able to follow, despite what she does not fully understand or agree with. And that's unfortunate that's not desirable, let me put it that way. It's not the ideal outcome. Ideally, you would like to go, honey, I'm with you. We're going to move to Los Angeles from Birmingham, Alabama. We're going to live in a metroplex, and we're going to give up a horse farm. I'm with you. Well, that she was with me, but if she hadn't have been with me, that would have been tough. So that's how I would answer that. You lead her and use a process and include her in the process and value her opinion.
Yeah, and you've been married 40 years. I've been married 24, so I'm trying to catch you. But one thing
won't catch me.
But one thing, I think, just to piggyback on that, I said I wasn't going to answer, but I guess I just broke my own rules. I would say, let me ask this as a question, so I won't answer. Would you say that part of that process actually is something that kind of smooths out with time? That it's not something maybe at the beginning in the first year of marriage, that there is a sense that as you do live together, as you as husbands live in an understanding way with your wives, that it does become maybe easier for her to respond.
Trust. Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you referred to a very important verse for husbands, which we didn't have time to get to. Live with your wife in an understanding way means with an intentional consideration to understand what makes her tick and what's important to her. My wife does not turn on a dime. She's a process thinker. And I have to recognize that and consider that in the journey of decision making. Every decision a husband makes is not going to appear to be the wisest decision. Sometimes it will be an obviously foolish decision. But part of what 1 Peter says before it tells husbands to give consideration to their wife, it says for wives to respect your husbands and trust the Lord with the decisions that he's making, and the Lord to direct those decisions. And there's a trust element in any relationship, especially when you're the follower, not the leader.
Good. Here's some questions. We had a few questions that really speak to the dealings with sin in a marriage. So if your spouse is in sin, what are some practical ways to gently rebuke and restore them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I do think maybe Galatians 6 is informative. If a brother is overtaken in a fault, those of you that are spiritual, which is a reference to what precedes, which is you're walking, submitted to, listening to, and manifesting the fruit of the Holy Spirit. You're not a perfect person. You're a spiritually sensitive and submitted person bearing the fruits of such a person. Those of you that are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, meekness. And I think maybe that's the thing, to address a concern, and I'm assuming housed in that, the way you read it sounded like they may not be aware of their sin. And you're trying to graciously help them recognize the concern you see in them. And so it's gently and maybe graciously saying, hey, I'm not sure you're aware of this. And let me say this. One of the things that will get you in trouble is assuming a motive based on limited perspective. So assume you don't know why they did what they did. You can also assume, and this is just me thinking out loud in light of that question, you can also assume maybe they're not aware that this is sin, but simply a choice. So it would be, I think, profitable, gentle, gracious, if you're aware they've fallen into sin. Prayerfully, gently, spiritually. Hey, honey, I don't know if you're aware of it, and I'm not sure I fully understand it, but I'd like to address it. And I'd like to tell you what is on my mind that concerns me or that I see in an effort to help address an issue that you may or may not be aware of. And I would communicate that concern. The second thing I would say is the porch time, the daily time in the Word of God, will provide opportunities to speak candidly about your own sin. Because part of what opens up your spouse to listen to your concerns is when you forthrightly confess yours. That whole thing of confess your sins to one another that you might be healed, James 5, is indicative of the kind of atmosphere that ought to characterize your relationship with your spouse. Harry Walls is a pastor. I teach a seminary class. I'm the campus pastor at the Master's University. I'm the vice president of student life. I'm the president of the Master's Fellowship. You would think I would be sinless by now. The truth is, I'm a sinner, and I fall short. And I have learned, I do not execute this perfectly, but hopefully consistently, to confess fault, failure, and sin. Which means there's a greater freedom on behalf of my spouse to enter into that same experience. Because, listen, I'm on her side. I want her to flourish. And when you communicate that by investing time and loving investments, there's a greater trust to enable you to say hard things. Open rebuke is better than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, and faithful are the wounds of a loving husband who is your friend, or a loving wife who's your friend. But you have to cultivate that culture. And if it's not been normative, then if it's for me, I would say then you should sit down and talk candidly about your appetite to cultivate that candor, constructive candor. That would be my answer.
Good, thank you. This one kind of swings a little bit, but I think it's in the same line. Any suggestions? You've spoken quite a bit about early on in the first session or two, just talking about the reality of the attacks that we have even from the world without, and obviously that third one, guarding against that. Any suggestions on promoting holiness with our children as they are attracted or in the midst of this world that's around us today?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So listen, as it relates to promoting holiness in your home, I think it turns on two things. One is your zeal to protect the honor of God, because holiness is an invitation by God to be like God. I want you to be like me. That's a positive thing. I'm granting you the power of the Holy Spirit, the power, the capacity to actually walk in a way that honors me, to be like me, holy as I am holy, 1 Peter 1. Be ye holy, for I am holy. And secondly, I'm granting you the prescriptive clarity in the Word of God that is designed to align you with the will and purposes of God. I'm giving you assets, and your children need to see your appetite to please Him. Your love for Him is the greatest motivator for holiness. Not because you fear Him, although you should and do. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It's a rightful regard of God. But God's, what we read the warning, He's the avenger. That's a legitimate motivation. It's not the highest one. The highest one is to please Him. And so promoting holiness is for my family, my children, to see my passion to please Him, to be like Him, because I love Him. Secondly, it's a credible testimony of a holy life. It is very difficult to promote holiness that isn't legitimately that and practiced. Holiness is not legalism. Legalism is deadly. Conformed behavior, absent the heart passion to do that behavior, is deadly and not Christian. You honor me with your lips, but your heart is far from me. It is possible to honor God with what you say and the life that you live outwardly and not have a life pleasing to God, because your heart has to be engaged. And when your children see a sincere desire to please the Lord, not religiosity, not because I'm embarrassed if you live a particular way, but because I genuinely want you to love the God I love, please the God I want to please, honor the one who made you and gave his Son to save you. And I model that. And I repent and I confess when I don't. And you'll hear me say that. If you're not willing to confess to your children failures in your own holiness, own it when you're guilty of it, it'll be hard for them to want that. That's how I would promote it. Sincere zeal for God is compelling. Religiosity, piety that's rules and religion is not compelling. It's deadening. And so I would be concerned, if I want to promote holiness, to try to avoid the rules and focus on the heart.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I can't remember who it was, but the expulsive power of a superior affection, right?
Yeah.
It's that reality that if Christ is that superior affection and our love for him exists in that measure, that's going to be dominant even in the way that we pursue holiness and piety. So
I think relationship with your children, and I don't know how old these children are, but in my journey of grace, raising 2 children as a pastor in a Christian home where you can be in the glass house, it seemed to me really important that the guy they saw on stage preaching was the guy they lived with at home. And somehow that needed to be consistent in order to promote an interest in the things of God and in the ways of God. And I would argue that's the best way to promote that. Model it and call them to it.
that's good. I've got a handful of questions that were asked, and I think these were excellent, just practical questions to apply what you've really taught to us today from the Word. This one says, my job requires me to be one-on-one with clients, sometimes up to an hour long. I have no control over what clients I see. They are assigned to me. I also do not know what they look like. I'm a married man, and sometimes the clients are younger women. How do I navigate this?
Yeah, that's a great question, practical. Thank you for that. I'm assuming, though you don't have control of all of those factors, you might have control over where you meet. And the context that I would argue is most important is accountability in that transaction. So if you need to meet, and you need to meet a woman not your wife for the purposes of business, then do so in a place where it's above reproach. I personally am very careful about the appearance of evil. And that's just something you're going to have to navigate by telling those in relationship with you of the circumstance you're in. Hey, I'm going to pick your restaurant, and that's where we're going to meet a client today. Keep yourself in a public place where people can see you. Make sure there's appropriate distance, and keep the conversation about business. And there's a tone in that. There's a transaction of body language that people can tell whether it's a professional transaction or somehow it's devolved into a personal transaction. So I think if you have to do that, do so in a way that limits the vulnerability you might have, both to failure as well as perception, would be my advice. As I just told you, I'm the vice president of student life. When I became the vice president, there was a solid door on my office. And I asked the administration to swap out my door for a glass door. And I always sit where you can see me. Whoever I'm talking to, you cannot see, for confidentiality, for their safety, but you can always see me. And I think that's the idea, is you put yourself in a place where you can eliminate failure on your part or wrong perceptions for your testimony on their part.
Yeah, it reminds me, I'm from Modesto, California. There's not much that's good from Modesto. It's kind of like the Nazareth of Northern California. But I do remember Billy Graham in the 50s actually met in that area, and the Modesto contract, I guess it was called, was devised there, where they had a clear plan of accountability whenever he traveled and wherever he went. And I think that was a really wise, as you said, to limit and minimize vulnerability. And I think part of it too, right, is just we want to take seriously the threat, as you said, from Proverbs 7. We don't have a neutral enemy. We have one he's going to constantly, the Prince of Darkness, is on attack. And so we have to guard against that. Here's a question. Dr. Walls, you mentioned having quality porch time with your wife. What other good habits would you encourage couples to cultivate? And then I will add to this one, what if you don't have a porch?
That is a figure of speech, all right? It's a place you meet that you like to meet, that you look forward to what happens there. And what happens there is a soulish heart transaction that you share before God. And that is the single best investment I would commend to you. Another one, which we don't always do, and I'm not sure why I am not more committed to repeating it, but I taught the book of James, and in an effort to prepare for that, I read the book of James through, and I did it with Karen. And we did 2 verses apiece. Every day we read the whole book. 5 chapters. You can read it in 14 minutes and 30 seconds. So 14 minutes and 30 seconds every day, 2 verses apiece, we would read it. What stood out to you? This is what stood out to me. We did that for 68 straight days. It without exception, singularly was the best marriage transaction I've experienced with my wife. The treasure of that was priceless, and I would commend it to you. It'd be like somebody showing up at your door and saying, listen, I've spread money all over your yard, and you have 14 minutes and 30 seconds to pick up all you want. That's analogous to how I feel like that was as a couple. I think early morning, praying before you go to bed, promote, what are the other things? Was it asked? Encourage what?
What other good habits would you encourage couples to cultivate?
So another good habit, and you've probably heard this before, is prioritizing quality time together as a couple. There are transactions you can't do at the soccer field with your kids. There are things you need to build into your marriage that are regular rhythms that cultivate intimacy of heart and life. We, as a couple, annually at our anniversary, which we just celebrated in June, rehearse what we like about our relationship and what needs to improve and how can we improve it. And one of those commitments is regular outings as a couple that include quality time and extended time. So this year, Lord willing, we'll have 3 extended times on vacation together, just the 2 of us. We did Yosemite for a week, 40th anniversary. We did Sequoia for 4 days in a tent. So I feel like tent 3 days is equal to a week in a lodge. It's close proximity, different environment. And building into our relationship, and I would commend this to you, things you can look forward to, things that you can share, and conversations you can have. So that's, for us, quarterly, those significant installments. Weekends, monthly, and it's not all weekend. I teach on Sundays, most Sundays someplace, so it's not always a whole weekend. But we try to get a weekend a month where we can take a Friday night, a Saturday, and invest. I would commend that to you. There is no substitute for good quality time. You say, man, you're not as busy or you're busier than I am. Maybe, but probably not. It's a priority. And I would commend that to you. Porch time, regular rhythmic time, weekend a month or a significant day away a month, and then quarterly or significant times where you're spending time together. I would commend that to you. Yep.
All right. I think that's obviously, this question's kind of tied to that, so it may be a bit redundant, but I think it's important. Ask the follow-up. How do you address, so you said here's some examples of ways to invest, but how do you address the busyness of life, including, as you said, one of those potential rivals, church ministry, and another one, children, to develop a rich devotional life with your spouse? So how do you approach the busyness of life, maybe those things you can't necessarily get out of, or maybe you can?
There's a concept called simplicity. Simplicity is prioritizing what matters. Loving God by managing your life and its resources for the goals and glory of God. It's a stewardship of time and assets. It's a biblical, blatant principle. What I would commend to you is taking the 168 hours of your week, putting on that calendar of 168 hours what I call the emphatic yeses, the non-negotiables. I'm going to do this. Because some things are more important than other things. You bounce a check, you can recover from that. You make certain choices you can't recover from. It's like glass. You don't bounce a check, you break the glass. So what I would encourage you to do is 3 things. Emphatic yeses, put them down. Commitments you make. 2, necessary no's come from the emphatic yeses. I've already committed that. I can't. You want me to come to an early morning? I can't. I've already committed to this. Emphatic yeses give you the power to say the necessary no's. And the 3rd thing is a real rest in a God who controls what you don't control. And the rhythm is, put it on the calendar. Listen, porch time will not happen unless it's on my calendar. Will not happen. And every day it doesn't happen because I'm in Carlsbad this morning. So there was no porch time with Karen this morning. I was up early. I'm here. But Monday we'll do it. Tomorrow I'm preaching for Lighthouse and James and Patrick and their ministry there. I'm not home tomorrow to do our normal rhythmic time in the morning. Life happens. But Monday we will. And Tuesday we will. And that's the rhythm of the emphatic yes. And you rest in the Lord for the ones you can't do, but the rhythm needs to reflect the priorities that matter. Because some things matter more than other things. And I've buried enough people and I've visited enough people in hospitals that somehow that clarity can be had, and you want to have it before you get to the end of your life and you recognize it. So I would emphatically put down, these are my priorities. And listen, everything's a rough draft. You make adjustments. This is working. This is not working. So you have to play with it.
That's helpful. Given the grand purpose and vision of marriage, how should one encourage and counsel the following 2 situations? 1, a single person that's struggling with their singleness. And 2, a couple struggling in their marriage that maybe isn't where they would like it to be. So really, and I think what the questioner is asking is, how do we guard against idolizing marriage maybe on one side inappropriately, or elevating it inappropriately? Where do we measure that? We haven't talked about singleness, but how do we counsel in that situation?
If I understand the question, for the single who wants to be married, the probability is God wants you to be married. It's the rare exception that God sets apart somebody for them, for himself. It's a good thing if you're single and God sets you apart for himself, but it's not typical that God reserves you for him without a spouse, because the normative pattern is it's not good for man to be alone, and God was present, and he knew the man needed a wife. So I would say to the single, be hopeful that God has designed you, if you're a woman, to be the helper suitable, if you're a man, to be the leader who enjoys the support of a spouse and the love and companionship of a woman. Hope for that. Assume that. And rest in the Lord while the timing of that unfolds. God controls sovereignly those gifts. Finds a wife, find implies you're looking. Find implies that there's a purposeful pursuit. He who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from God. That implies God is providing the solution for that pursuit. Rest in that. And here's the other thing I would say. Prepare for that. If you're a single, all the things we talked about this weekend are applicable to you. Learning to protect your heart in holiness. Protecting your marriage starts by protecting your integrity now. Bad habits today are difficult to shed later. Accountability today is as important as when you're married. If you're going to lead and love, you need to be leading and loving now. If you're going to be an independent from my parents person and you're a man, you need to get a job, make a living, and be able to function as a man. You need to demonstrate leadership now so that when you're married, nothing magic happens at the front other than you're married. And now culpable and responsible for the responsibility, but mature in preparation for that responsibility. Learn to be other-centered now. Learn to defer and sacrifice now. So, and if you're a woman, learn to be a practical, helpful person so that you can be a ministry asset, not an immature detriment. So grow up, capitalize on this time. I would encourage you to take opportunities you can't easily access when you're married. You can travel, you can do missions things, you can do ministry things because you have liberty that you may not have, which is Paul's whole argument, 1 Corinthians 7. You get married, you have responsibility. You don't have the same latitude and freedom. Take advantage of your freedom to mature and prepare and be hopeful. That's what I would say to that person. The second part had to do with the person who is not happy at home.
Counseling a struggling marriage. So if you're, the second one was if someone that's in a marriage, you have a marriage and they're struggling in their marriage, how would you come alongside of them as a couple to counsel them?
Well, first of all, I would try to motivate and inspire in recognition that marriage works. I said that to you. You may be in a very frustrating situation and you're ready to throw away this whole idea. Certainly our culture has. It's either not necessary, let's just move in together. Well, listen, that might be part A of you might have the right person. That's just not the right place. So if you're a struggling couple, I would calibrate. I really would. I would align my thinking with biblical revelation, and I would adjust accordingly. I would do what we talked about doing. Believing and cleaving and uniting is the foundation of intimacy. That's what you long for. And there's immaturity in your home, so you're going to need to, both of you, hey, let's get some help. An older couple who's ahead of us, spiritual leadership that can coach us. There's immaturity in us. Let's address it. And it might be long-lived because of the modeling or the home we grew up in. A lot of us don't grow up in homes that model healthy marriages. The Bible is the paradigm, pattern, and blueprint, but we often don't get to see the application of that in the homes we grow up in. So you need help learning and relearning new ways to think. If you're a woman in this culture, the idea that my husband is going to make decisions is so alien, it can be repulsive. somehow I'm a lesser person because I defer to his leadership. That is blatantly unbiblical. You're not lesser. Actually, you may be more mature in your capacity to trust God with decisions that are difficult for you to receive or not enjoy the freedom to make. And husbands need to learn how to lead, and wives need to learn how to love and respect and follow, and that's something I would focus on, the foundations of what makes a rich relationship. And that won't happen overnight, but it can happen. It will happen if you apply biblical prescriptions.
And I would just add, you've spoken about it here, and I think it's important for us to remember, the fact that you guys have all come out here today is just a blessing and an encouragement, because there are so many patterns or examples in our culture of what not to do. Yeah. It's great that we're at least setting our minds and our hearts upon the Word to be faithful and follow what He has said. And in so doing, you can have an impact on another family that comes in your home and gets to see you wrestle through what it looks like to be a faithful follower of Christ.
If you're really struggling, you need to enlarge your support system. Isolation won't just kill you personally, it'll harm you relationally. Marriages need allies, and so solicit help. Transparency, candor in trusted spaces with trusted people is healthy. And both the words I use, trusted people, trusted spaces, find that. This church, Lighthouse, you have elders, you have shepherds, you need them. And there'll be older couples whose heart is for you, to help you. They don't know it all, they haven't lived it all, but they can invest in supporting you as you journey through the challenges of your marriage, its disappointments, its frustrations, maybe your immaturities, both as a couple or as individuals. That's okay. We've all been there. But it's about being proactive to get support that will enable you to enjoy what God says is good.
All right, this one, it's a two-part question. I believe that the wife asked one part and the husband the other. So I'm going to go ahead and read them together. Is it wrong to not take my husband's last name in marriage? The other, can I take my wife's last name in marriage?
That is a good question. I would argue that if you're the wife, keeping your name implies that you're still connected to your father's name and family, which to me would contradict the leaving, to becoming a new unit. The candle gets blown out. I'm not a Smith. I'm a Walls. The husband's name is his family name, and you represent his family. You're becoming a part of his family unit. So I would suggest to you and actually argue that the wife taking the husband's name, just like I described in Genesis 2, is good for him and good for you. I think the husband taking her name would contradict that, because the family name is her father's family name, which she got at birth through her father, and you want to establish your family as an independent unit, and that bears your name. And that's why when I marry a couple, it's Mr. and Mrs. Harry Walls, not Mr. and Mrs. Walls. There's a specific Harry related to this last name. And so that's what I would propose, that there's an all-in buy-in. The unity candle means it's no longer somebody else, it's us. It's no longer you, it's no longer me, it's us. And that name travels through the husband.
I think we got time for maybe one more. So, if sexual intimacy is a celebration or reflection of marital closeness, should a married couple try to pursue sexual intimacy even if sexual desire is not present anymore? And then in parentheses, like in the older years. I'm not going to define
So obviously
older.
That's a very personal question.
Yeah, I'm not going to define older.
I would say this. I said it earlier. Physical intimacy is the natural progression and expression of soulish intimacy. It's the expression of affection, the most open expression of affection, naked and not ashamed. It's as intimate as two people can be if their soul is united. That is a good desire and pursuit. However, and I'm assuming by the way that question was stated, maybe both parties are at the stage of life where that's not needed or desired. Let me put it that way. And I would say if by common agreement, kind of like the 1 Corinthians 7 thing, if you agree to not engage intimately, physically, both of you, for a time or for a significant time, I would be inclined to say, okay, because there's other ways to express affection that maybe is more attractive in that stage of life, whatever that stage would be. I would say that if one party is disinterested but the other party is interested, the disinterested party needs to get interested because it's not healthy. And so God designed it that way, even if it's a pure act of other-centeredness. Okay, so there's not a satisfaction for you, whichever side of the equation you're on. When you consider the needs of others as more important than yourself, that's a good thing. It's a Christ-like thing. It may be a sacrificial act. It may be, and I'm not talking about obligation, because I'm going to suggest that the spouse who experiences potential benefit at the cost of obligation. I'm doing this because I have to, as a duty. I'm going to argue that it undermines the treasure of the love that is meant to be exchanged. So, tough question, personal question. By mutual agreement, I don't know the circumstances. There may be things that prohibit or inhibit or hurt or make it very hard. But if one party desires it, the other party ought to get interested unless they can't. And sometimes, and I'm at the stage of life where sometimes there are inhibitors. There's just challenges. Issues of menopause, issues of other things that make it hard. Well, if you're a loving husband, you certainly aren't going to pressure your spouse in a way that's painful or hurtful. And if you're the loving spouse who's capable, you would want to express that love as an honorable expression of other-centeredness, because my happiness is in her happiness, and hers ought to be in mine. I mentioned earlier my wife loves animals. She loves horses. I do not love horses. I like them. But it's not about the horses. The reason I was a ranch hand and had a little farm and cleaned stalls and mowed grass and fixed fences was not because I found joy in it. The satisfaction is loving a woman who loved it. It wasn't fun.
All right, well, I want to do something. I get the chance as the questioner to ask my question. And it's actually, I would just ask, would you do us the privilege? You did this often in class. Would you be willing to just kind of give us your last 2-minute summary of all that you've done here? What would you leave us? It's on the burden of your heart for marriages, for Christian marriages in our culture and society today. If you just left something with us, what would you say?
Marriage matters. It matters to heaven, and it matters to you. No matter what your experience has been, it matters enough to treasure it and align yourself to the Word of God that will allow you to experience the blessing of it. So the big idea I would leave you with, calibrating you, which is kind of the big word I used early on, aligning yourself, is seeing each other in this relationship the way it really is. It is not good to do this alone. And you can be married and be alone. And the priorities necessary to experience what God intended and what you desire, we talked about. So I would encourage you to do the calibrating, just your thinking. Maybe dig in further. Maybe you weren't clear on what was said, or the biblical revelation, or the interpretation of something I said. Okay, dig in. Be a Berean. See if it's so. But if it is so, I like to say this to my students at Masters. This has authority over me. Jesus is the Lord and the Bible's true, and they have authority over me. So I would encourage you to submit to the revelation of a good God who created marriage. He made yours. What God has joined together is an expression of a creation of God that didn't exist, which is why you can't break it without exception. Irreconcilable differences isn't a reason. He made it. He gifted you with it. Align yourself to that and commit yourself to it. And I would encourage you to proactively invest in your home, because somebody's watching your marriage. Maybe it's the children you're raising. Maybe it's the neighbors that are watching. And this world is giving up on marriage. People are sleeping together, living together. They're not getting married, as if marriage is the problem. Biblical marriage is the solution, not the problem. But it is work. So that maybe that's a long-winded 2-minute summary.
That's excellent.
And protect it. That was the last thing. And I know that was a heavy session. I just want you to protect what's priceless. And it's not going to happen because you leave here and go, I'm going to blow the daylights up of my marriage. I'm going to cause my kids to hate me. It want nothing to do with God. Nobody's thinking that. But somebody's going to do that without careful consideration of the principles we considered. So protect it.
Amen. Well, let's thank Pastor Perry Walls for his time today. Let me give you a few important announcements, just so you're aware, a couple things as we kind of get ready to transition